Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and we are the Astrology Star Sisters. And joining me today is Madam Simon. Welcome, Simon. How are you today?
I am. How are you?
It's been a challenging day. That's all I can say. So, we're talking about the Leo new moon for 2025. And Madam Simon is an archetypal astrologer, tarot reader, visionary artist, and her website is iconalchemy.com. I'm an astrologer, author, intuitive, and tarot reader also, and my website is alightpath.com. And this is an out of bounds Leo new moon, and manifesting with the new moons, I like to wait till the first sliver of the moon, but just before it's new or around the time that it's new, I oftentimes start working on my manifesting for the month, and I begin with writing down what I'd like to release and either bury that or burn it in a safe container, and then I write my desires and wishes that I want to bring in, and then I like to light a candle to initiate the manifestation. What do you do, Simon?
Well, I look at the day of the new moon as being a time of incubation of um, things that I'm going to focus on for that upcoming lunar cycle. So before I'm getting specific, I'm letting that new moon day or evening be this time of meditating, of letting things kind of percolate in the back of my brain. Um, and I don't get specific until the actual light of that first crescent is there.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So the new moon in Leo is in the 10th house, and it's at 2 degrees and 8 minutes. And Leo is a fixed sign that's stable but can also be stubborn. It's of the fire element. It's energy and passion. The planetary ruler is the sun, and new moons are about new beginnings and creativity. And Simon, will you share about Leo, please?
So Leo is of the fixed modality that makes it stable and it has follow through energy. It's not necessarily going to start something, but it's going to carry forward whatever was started in a cardinal sign. Um, it has determination. It can be resistant to change and stubborn. um, the ruling planet for Leo is the sun. It is of the fire element. So that brings energy, desire, passion, excitement, adventure, competition, and motivation. The mantra is I show, um, which it kind of emphasizes that solar rulership, with the sun being that daylight consciousness that reveals things, okay, that shines a light on them. Uh, some key words for Leo are self expression, creativity, being appreciated, vitality, passion, leadership, confidence, playfulness, and focus. And some cautions are that Leo can be perceived as egotistical, dogmatic, power centered, and arrogant.
And this month, the moon is out of bounds on the new moon from July 21st to the 24th. And then Hygeia is also out of bound from June 12th through February 17th of 2026. And will go retrograde October 28th, 2025 through February 13th of 26. And the area that it will cover, Hygeia, will be from 7 Gemini to 7 Cancer, and both the moon and Hygeia are in the northern declination. Anything you'd like to add?
No?
Okay, and the new moon is on July 24th at 12:11 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time and 3:11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And again, the moon is at 2 degrees Leo in 8 minutes, and we're using a chart for Seattle, Washington. And here we have the Leo new moon aspects. The sun and moon are conjunct each other, sextile Uranus, trine Saturn and Neptune, square Chiron, opposite Pluto, and sesquiquadrate the north node. So, why don't you tell us about some of these aspects, Simon?
Okay. So, first of all, we've got the sextile with Uranus. Actually, the sun's sextile to Uranus is happening within 2 or 3 hours of us recording this. But it's still, a fairly, it's, 2 degrees, within 2 degrees at the time of the new moon. So a reasonably tight aspect. And then that new moon is also trine Saturn and Neptune and opposite Pluto. So all of the outer planets are being engaged at the same time by this new moon. And so, that's very interesting because Leo is very much about self-expression. And here it's making all these connections with these generational planets, transcendental planets that relate more to the big forces at work in society, in the world at large. Okay, so there's definitely this kind of challenge going on between the personal and the political, between the individual and the group, and within this this lunation. And because the sun is still separating from a recent square to Chiron, and earlier in the day of this new moon, the moon will also have squared Chiron, and Chiron actually is still conjoining Eris, about 1.5 degrees away from Eris. So there is that, there's this kind of friction, maybe some feelings that are a little bit raw, a little loaded. Eris, of course, is disruptive, and then Chiron relates to our wounding and to, yes, to wisdom, to healing practices. We certainly see that Chiron can relate to holistic healing and herbs and acupuncture and all of those kinds of things that are not allopathic medicine. But there still is that sense of Chiron's always going to show us what hurts. Chiron's always going to show us not simply what hurts in a temporary sense, like, a banged up knee or something like that. I fell and I scraped myself up, but rather things that linger, things that we have difficulty addressing, things that we have difficulty healing. And the recognition that some things never truly do heal. And that we have to find ways to live with those limitations, those hurts, those difficulties. Okay. So it's interesting, that square, it's a separating square, so it's not as intense as it might be if they were, closer together. But there is still this ongoing friction and rawness that that goes with Chiron being conjoined to Eris, and then the sun, that light of consciousness, shines a light on whatever it's touching, right? And so it's like, oh yeah, see this sore point here? Poke, poke, right? And then the moon is our unconscious awareness of things and our bodily awareness of things. So particularly for people with, chronic illnesses or who are having, something acute going on right now, we may be more sensitive to those things at this time. And at the same time that moon and sun, that unconscious and conscious awareness, being in aspect to all of these outer planets at once, that's, it's tapping into this ongoing energy of all of the outer planets working together. And they have been for a while, and they're going to continue for a while, right? They're going to continue to remain in orb of aspects to each other, supportive aspects of each other. And so this sun and moon are now really aware of those large forces at work in our lives. And so that's an interesting combination when it's like, we want to have the self-expression of Leo, the passion, the vitality, the feeling alive. Okay, I very much think of Leo as like, a little kid out in the garden delighting in the sun and the flowers. Okay, they're joyful and expressive. They're not going to hold back if they're not getting, frowned at or punished for being noisy, right? They're going to play. And Leo can be incredibly playful. And so that's a wonderful energy in and of itself. But for all of us on the planet right now, we've got our playful parts. We've got the part of us that wants to express ourselves and be seen and acknowledged. But it's up against this, like, oh, there's this big stuff going on in the background. Okay. Now, the sun and moon being trine Saturn and Neptune, who are in Aries, that's some nice new beginning energy. Okay, that reinforces the new beginning energy that we see with any new moon. Okay, and it does so in a way that can be supportive both of our sense of structure and our ability to play and daydream. Okay, so that's lovely. The sextile to Uranus makes us more willing to embrace new ideas, to consider change, which, I mentioned that Leo, being a fixed sign, is a little change averse, but in cahoots with Uranus is more willing to, look at new possibilities and consider new changes. So that's a good thing. But the opposition to Pluto makes things kind of intense. It can reinforce where we feel like society is oppressive, where we feel that group dynamics may have some toxicity to them. Since Pluto is in Aquarius, and Aquarius is definitely technologically oriented, then we can see the potential problems with our technology, especially our information technology, our computer systems, the internet, surveillance technology, AI, all of that kind of stuff, right? So we may be more aware of how those factors can feel, oppressive, stifling, toxic, etc. at this time. But like I said, we're getting some support from the other outer planets, and the other outer planets are interacting favorably with Pluto. And we'll see the larger configuration that all of that taps into in a bit.
Did you want to talk about the sesquiquadrate to the North Node?
Well, the sesquiquadrate is a square and a half, and so it's a little bit tense. It's like a square. Its energies can sometimes maybe be discharged a little bit more easily than with a square, but there still is that kind of friction. And I think, what I guess the best way I would describe the friction with regard to these is that our conscious and unconscious awareness that are aligned together right now may be having difficulty working out how our personal self-expression works into the larger purpose, the larger path, the karmic arc of the world. Okay, so again, that reinforces the individual and society, and how the heck do we get them to play nicely together?
Exactly. That's great. Thank you. So we're going to start looking at aspect patterns, and we have a T square with Venus and Hygeia square to Mars in the south node or the lunar nodes. So would you like to talk about that, Simon?
Right. So that T square, Venus is and Aia are in a position that is said to be at the bendings of the nodes. Okay, they are perpendicular and perhaps acting at cross purposes to that karmic arc. Um, so that's interesting because that can seem sometimes like, okay, there is something that we really need to pay attention to. It's drawing our attention, but it's drawing our attention away from the path that we are trying to go on, and that the circumstances around us are also directing us on that path, right? Um, that's not simply a path of like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to go this way because, my free will tells me so. No, this is like, the big forces of fate and circumstance and society and conditioning and all those other things that can direct us in ways that we did not consciously choose, right? That's part of that karmic arc. Now, the south node is what we're comfortable with, where we've come from, where we may have, skills from an earlier time. Okay. For those of us who believe in reincarnation, it might be from past lives. For those of us who are strictly within this life, it's like, what did you grow up with? Right. And the moon is, or not the moon, sorry, Mars is hanging out there. Okay. And so our energy has been in that space of, I just want to keep it comfortable. I just want to do like, the things that I know I'm good at, the things I'm used to. Okay. Mars at the South Node can also relate to a kind of loss or dissemination of energy. That I just don't have quite as much gumption, quite as much get up and go to be able to handle doing the things that I would otherwise do if Mars was in a different spot, right? Okay, so now Venus here is just past a square with Mars. Squares Mars, I believe, the day before. Okay, and so Venus here, Venus is that connective principle. Also relates to what we take pleasure in, right? And Mars can be that will, that drive to move toward what we desire. So we like to have Venus and Mars like actually getting along, but here they're having some friction. And that friction is backed up by the lunar nodes, right? Mars is doing what is karmically appropriate here. Venus is the one who's like, no, 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 I want to do this fun thing over here. Or I want to connect with these people over here. Or I want to have this relationship, or I want to work out things pertaining to my relationships. And that's not going with the flow. Okay. The North Node is in Pisces. It wants to go with the flow. It wants all of us to go with the flow, right? It's a watery sign. Now, Venus here is also just a couple degrees away from Aia, okay? And I believe she had the conjunction with Aia. I think that was this past weekend. I don't remember. My sense of time is a little skewed at the moment, but Venus conjunct Aia in Gemini is dealing with, Aia deals with what creates or is problematic for our healthy conditions. Okay. And in Gemini, that would be healthy conditions surrounding communication and our thinking, our learning processes. So with Aia in Gemini, we can see concerns about mental health. Okay. Somebody in somebody who has this position natally. Hi, I do, might be concerned with, do I learn in a different way from other folks, and what are good conditions for my learning? Okay. So, Venus conjoining Hygeia then is going to be concerned about um, healthy communication, mental health that concerns relationships. Things like social anxiety might show up in this situation, especially with both of them at the bendings. Okay. Um, and with this aspect pattern, I strongly recommend, saying to touch grass is not, that's not a diss at this point. That is, go out, get into nature and get grounded, because Gemini can have difficulty being grounded since it's an air sign and it's answering to Mercury retrograde. Okay. And so anyone who's, feeling a bit wonky with regard to communication during Mercury retrograde is going to be feeling that more under these circumstances, especially when it comes to relationships and communication within relationships. It should also be noted that Mercury, who is ruling that Gemini, Venus, and Hygeia, is answering to this new moon because the sun rules Leo. Okay, so the sun here is the final dispositor for a whole bunch of stuff in this chart, basically for everything other than the moon and Jupiter. Okay, and so a whole lot of this then is going to relate to, what do you feel in your heart of hearts? What is your core awareness telling you? What is your passion telling you? Okay. What, you don't want to be giving a whole lot of weight to things you just feel lukewarm about. Okay. This is where you really want to pay attention to what stirs your vitality, what gets the sacred flame inside of you going. Okay.
Exactly. And I would add that Mercury is also the ruler of the South Node in Mars, which then again, those are
Mhm.
also answering to that sun, just to add on to what you were saying.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thank you. Gemini and Virgo both being ruled by Mercury. There's a whole lot of stuff answering to Mercury retrograde, who is in turn answering to that sun. So I do think that there's, when we've got Mercury in Leo, there's a lot of identification with one's ideas. Okay, that they become, you take it kind of personally if somebody doesn't like what you have to say, right? And I think that is driving some of this friction with regard to Venus and Mars. That, what we want and how do we go about getting it are kind of fraught right now, and they're having this issue with each other because maybe we're overly identifying with our ideas and taking things personally.
Yes, exactly. So now we're going to go on to another aspect pattern called the minor grand trine. And you and I've talked about this, and this is a pattern that's going to be active for quite some time. We have Saturn and Neptune sextile to Pluto and Uranus. So I'll let you explain that.
Right. So this is, all of the outer planets are working together in cahoots with each other, supporting each other. Um, and, that this one of the two social planets, Saturn, um, is also part of this. And so that's really powerful, big forces, but they are things that can operate, as this kind of subtle influence in the background. How big their action is going to depend upon, what they're aspecting within either somebody's natal chart or a country's inception chart. And so, some days we don't notice this stuff. Okay. But these planets do color generations. Okay. So, people who, rock stars of the late 60s, early 70s had a certain amazing, intense power to tap into our dreams on a really deep level. Well, that was when Neptune was in Scorpio. Okay. And so that marked the music, the art of that generation. Okay. Actually, that would be through the 60s, not the 70s. By the 70s, you get Neptune moving into Sagittarius. Now there's like, some more being a bit more exploratory, a bit more adventurous, not strictly rock and roll, but getting into other genres, right? Okay. Um, and so you get that kind of a color to the music of a generation. When you get Neptune moving into Capricorn in the 80s, now you've got, kind of more corporate rock and more Saturnian themes to music. The big business emphasis on it, as well as the Satanic Panic. Okay. All of those things related to that generational influence. And so, I'm just using Neptune as the example there, but all of these outer planets then shape how we deal with certain big themes over the course of a generation. What's the difference between millennials and, say, Generation X or the boomers? Okay. What are the subtleties of Generation Jones? Those are all going to be colored by these outer planets. Okay. And so now, when we've got these outer planets interacting in a way that is supportive of each other, now that doesn't mean everything's all like, wine and roses and rainbows and unicorns, okay? It just means that they're working together. Now, outer planets can be kind of, even though they can seem maybe subtle and in the background at times because they have these long orbits, when they do touch something personal, it's very powerful. They transform whatever they touch from the ground up. And when people have lived through outer planet transits to their personal planets, with an outer planet conjoining their personal planets, boy, they really feel it. Okay. I mean, those are the times they're more likely to show up for a consultation with one of us. Okay. So, yes, this is a long-term influence. Yes, we're not always going to notice it, but when it interacts with something important and personal for us, we are going to feel it, and it's going to be intense. Okay. So people with personal placements in the early degrees of Aquarius, Aries, and Gemini are all likely to be, or any one of those, are all likely to be really feeling this particular minor grand trine. People with placements in early degrees of signs squaring any of those are also going to be feeling that, squaring or opposing. Okay. So yeah, this is an ongoing thing. We're going to continue to be experiencing how the various transiting planets tap into it, and those of us with personal placements that are being touched by it are also going to continue to feel it. But these are the forces shaping this current generation.
Well, and I would almost say anybody with early degree planets, period, anywhere in their chart or any sign are going to feel it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to go on to some miscellaneous aspects. We have a few trines here. Jupiter is trine Vesta. Juno is trine the North Node. And Mercury is trine Ceres. Would you like to speak to those, or do you want me to read the squares also?
Oh, you can read the squares also, then I'll cover what I can.
Pallas Athena is square Juno. Mercury is square Vesta, Lilith, and Juno. because I drew in Black Moon Lilith with a purple line there for everybody. It's conjunct Vesta. So go ahead.
Right. So that means the Jupiter trine also touches Lilith. Um,
Mhm.
so Vesta and Lilith have been hanging out for a little while now together. And, Vesta relates to our focus. Okay. What are we focused on? And in a way, it's like, just like a more internal or less outwardly active version of Mars in that sense of relating to our focus, our drive. Okay. Um, she is the goddess of the hearth, the sacred flame. Okay. She relates to what we hold sacred, what is important to us. Um, and since she's the Roman version of the goddess, there are also some overtones pertaining to not simply the hearth of home, but the hearth of country. Okay, what keeps country alive? What is its gathering place? What is the flame that lights it up? What keeps it going? Okay, so that could also very much relate to what are our principles. Okay, and in Scorpio, then there is this. This is pertaining to what we feel deeply, what our intuitions are about underlying power dynamics, what is the emotional truth that we are currently focused on. Conjoining Lilith, then she's getting into, Lilith relates to this narrative of rebellion against oppression, and the willingness to assert our authenticity, to stand up for our integrity, even when our integrity requires that we do things that the rest of society is not too keen on. Okay. Lilith can very much relate to, themes of alienation. She is the demonized feminine. Okay. That which is rejected by the mainstream, power structures and status quo. Um, and she will definitely fight for those who are marginalized. But she's also not terribly interested in being liked or likable.
Mm.
And so she can sometimes relate to, very reactive behaviors. Okay. Um, yes, she is very good for tapping into and asserting um, our internal power, not power over others, but very specifically our own internal power, getting in touch with that and knowing that. Um, and so, in combination with Vesta, then in Scorpio, Scorpio is known for dealing with intense themes of power dynamics. Okay, and all of the intense subjects of humanity, politics, sex, money, power, psychology, religion, but more like occult levels of spiritual matters than official religion. Um, there's what are the institutional power dynamics, sure, but also what are the underlying power dynamics between any group of people. So, you walk into a room and it's your Scorpio intuition that is giving you, the spidey senses that are saying, oh, wait a minute, I just walked into the middle of a fight. Right. Okay. Um, uh, Scorpio has the scorpion, this stinging creature as its symbol, but it also has the phoenix as a symbol. And so it relates to cycles of death and rebirth. But people tend to forget when they're looking at that death and rebirth process, oh wait, there's that phoenix has to get burnt to ash. before it rises again. Okay. So there is, intensity here. Um, and feelings that can be difficult to to acknowledge, um, especially because Scorpio is very concerned with power dynamics. There is that sense of, if I let you know what I really feel, you might use it against me. Okay. So all of those kind of fraught topics are here. Um, Jupiter then in this trine with these two, Jupiter is in Cancer, answering to that new moon. Okay, the moon is ruled, or the Cancer is ruled by the moon. So Jupiter is getting this dose of conscious and unconscious awareness that in turn is opening up our ability to look at the big picture, to find opportunities within the emotional intensity that we may be experiencing during this time. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, because Jupiter is associated with hope and faith and optimism. And in Cancer, that is hope and faith and optimism that can be self-protective, but also takes care of those closest to us. It's associated with home and family. Okay. So it's an interesting reinforcement then of Vesta. Okay. The goddess of the hearth. Okay. And so there is that sense of an emotional opportunity for growth, for spiritual growth, okay, that at the same time is respecting our need to protect ourselves and those closest to us. And because it's also tapping into Lilith, it's also tapping into that, I am more interested in being in touch with my own emotional truth than in painting a pretty picture about it for you. Okay. So this can be good for deep, honest sharing with those who are close enough to us and, part of our kind of family of the heart that I like to use as the description for Cancer. Okay. For those who are able to handle us when we're not feeling pretty, when we're a little messy, okay, this is the time when there can be some really deep bonding over that, and learning about what really matters to us, and what we're willing to appear a little bit messy to defend. Okay. Juno trine the North Node. Juno has been in Scorpio for a while, did this whole retrograde thing in Scorpio, had us reconsidering our relationship ties, the social contract, the social fabric. What is it that we are and are not willing to do in order to uphold certain relationships, certain institutions? Okay. Well, now Juno is direct after all that. And going forward with, okay, some things are going to need to die and or be reborn. Okay, some things are going to have to go through that Phoenix process, right? And looky here, Juno trine the North Node suggests that indeed that is part of the karmic arc, that is part of what is supposed to happen, that is divinely aligned, as opposed to, this is coming out of left field from somewhere. No, this is the natural conclusion of some long-term processes. Okay. Mercury trine Ceres. Okay, they're both in fiery signs. Mercury, of course, relating to our thought and communication, but also our organization, some travel, some learning, also commerce, okay, and games. I like my games, okay. Um, so Mercury relates to all of those things. In Leo, all of those things now have need to express things for us. Okay. We aren't simply talking to talk, we're talking to express um, our creative side, and we want to be seen, we want to be acknowledged. Okay. So Mercury retrograde in Leo then is very much about how do we find our own voice. Trine Ceres then. Ceres can relate to what nurtures us, what nourishes us, but also what are we hungry for? And so this, I think, also reinforces some of that core sense of passion that we see with any Leo new moon, okay, which is what are we passionate about? And in this case, it's what feeds our spirit. And how do we develop our own voice as a result of paying attention to those needs? Okay. So the squares. We've got Pallas. Athena is square Juno. Pallas is strategic thinking, planning, organizational thought. She's goddess of wisdom, but also a goddess of warfare. Okay. It should also be noted that she is a goddess who sprang fully formed from her father Zeus's head. Okay. And so she can relate to ideas of the feminine that are not rooted in actual female biology, okay? That are not rooted in being born of a woman. She is an idea. And that's very interesting now, because if you're thinking about, woman as an idea versus woman as what is anyone's physical reality of womanhood or femaleness, femaleness versus femininity, right? Sex versus gender. Okay, having Pallas be going through Aquarius is now putting some of those ideas about gender and femininity in a very heady, intellectual space, right? Which may not really have a whole lot to do with biological reality. And oh, by the way, humans have a vast array of different possibilities biologically when it comes to, X chromosome, Y chromosome, how their hormones are expressed and all of that. Okay. So I do feel like, some of the debate over trans rights in our society right now has been related to Pallas being in Aquarius and retrograde. Okay. Which has caused no end of problems for the small minority of people who actually identify as trans, okay? And they're just like, hey, we want to live our lives. We don't want to have to get all caught up in this stuff. Okay, so here we see Pallas squaring Juno, and I really think that's relating very much to what I just talked about Juno reconsidering what is the social fabric, what are the things we are or are not willing to do in order to uphold society, in order to uphold our institutions. And now here we have this goddess who is more of an intellectual idea of woman, okay, than the messy reality of woman. And they're button heads. Okay. In terms of what is our actual societal attitude, and what tactics are we going to use in relation to the social fabric and whether or not we uphold certain institutions or certain ideas. Okay. So There is tension there, obviously, with that square. We've also got Mercury square Vesta, Lilith, and a wider square to Juno. Okay. And so that's interesting because now we're getting, Mercury is moving away from the opposition to Pallas, okay, but is still loosely opposite Pallas. And so I think is drawing in some of the tension between Pallas and Juno, um, that is now being translated back to Mercury. Okay. And so a lot of our thoughts with Mercury in Leo then are going to relate to our core sense of self, which is a little different than like our identity. Okay, what we would see of identity if this was, say, Mercury in Aries, right? This is more what is our core heart, corazon, right? Our
Mhm.
core sense of purpose and, the courage, the passion, the drive that gets us up in the morning or evening, depending on your schedule, right? What gets us out there and willing to show ourselves to the rest of the world. And there's some friction right now in terms of that drive. Um, going back to Vesta being the sacred flame, and going back to Lilith relating to our feelings of alienation, and with Juno now separating from Vesta and Lilith, then our willingness to do certain things to uphold our relationships, our society, our institution, it's informed by that sacred flame of Vesta from the conjunction, that was going on between these three. It's informed by the authenticity of Lilith. But now Juno's going to go back and, kind of toughen up and do the thing that she does as Queen of Heaven and put on a brave face, even with her, philandering husband, Zeus, doing the things he does, right? She's still going to try to uphold the social institutions, okay? Which we already know Lilith is not terribly interested in upholding. So, yeah.
Thank you. And can you explain briefly what Black Moon Lilith you're using? Because there's 3 and an asteroid Black Moon Lilith, so if you don't mind.
So asteroid Lilith is not a black moon.
Okay.
So there's 3 black moon Liliths. One of them is the mean position, which is effectively the aggregate or average position, because the Lilith position sort of wobbles all over the place. It's hard to pin down, much like Lilith herself. Okay. She's not interested in being mastered by any man. Okay. And therefore, we see that here in astrological calculations of her. The osculating Lilith is sometimes referred to as the true Black Moon Lilith. And that one goes all over the place. Forward, backward, swinging wildly back and forth. Okay. I believe that one is all the way up near Sagittarius at this point, or late Scorpio, one of the two. The Black Moon Lilith that I use is the interpolated, also called the natural Black Moon Lilith. Does not swing as wildly as the osculating, maybe more precise than the mean. But I mean, at this point, like I said, Lilith is hard to pin down. And so while I have made the choice that I have made for which Lilith I am working with based on what seems to be more accurate, I do tend to give credence to M. Kelly Hunter's work, which basically looks at these positions as a corridor of Lilith influence. So that effectively you go, what's the widest stretch between Liliths that you've got? That's your corridor. And everything between that is touched by Lilith. So that's how I truly operate on this subject. But in order to have just one position for us to mark on a chart, I use the natural position.
Thank you for explaining that, because some people would say, well, that's not where Black Moon Lilith is, because I use a different one. And I wanted
Right.
to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to briefly talk about the lunar phase family, or gestational phase. It uses the same 4 cycles of the moon: new, first quarter, full, and last quarter. And Pessin came up with this, and she wrote a book on it, and uses each phase lasts 9 months, so it's a 3-year phase. And we're at the new moon, so we're at the beginning phase. And then the first quarter is about adjustments, full is the realization of a goal, and third is reevaluation: do I continue or finish? And so on July 24th, we're starting that new phase at 2 degrees Leo. The first quarter in 9 months will be April 22nd of 2026 at 3 degrees Leo and 56 minutes. The full phase will be January 22nd of 2027, I believe. I made a error there, at 2 degrees Leo and 14 minutes. And the third quarter will be October 23rd of 2027 at 29 Cancer, because they do sometimes go into the sign before or after, if they're early sign or early degree or late degree. And then the yearly phase, lunar phase, we're beginning the new moon, and then the Leo full moon will be on February 1st of 2026 at 13 degrees Leo and 4 minutes. So sometimes you need 3-year cycle to accomplish something. Sometimes the yearly cycle works. And sometimes just new moon to new moon is enough to complete that. So I just like to add a little extra information for people to use. I want to thank you, Simon, for joining me today. I appreciate it. And I
Thank
want
you
to
for having me, Liz.
Oh, you're welcome. And I want to thank our audience who's joined live and those that come back and watch at a future time. And Simon, I'm going to let you share about your Patreon page, please.
Right. So on Patreon, I write about the astrological transits for my patrons, and I also create custom astrological art there for my patrons. And like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer. So if you wish to schedule a consultation with me, you can visit me at iconalchemy.com.
Thank you. And I'm consulting astrologer. I have a newsletter and a YouTube channel. So sign up, contact us if you want a consultation. And I have a lot of other shows to come back and enjoy and in the future. So I look forward to having you again on my show and join us. And then I will be on Talk Cosmos on August 17th, talking about the Virgo new moon on the archetypal symbol panel. I want to thank our sponsor, Astro Peregrine Software, and you can reach them at astroperegrine.com. And I'm going to say goodbye for now. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.